Debates about the existence of God and the spiritual experiences that attest to that are littered with misunderstandings about the nature of knowledge. And so often conversations about religion, religious experiences, and God come unstuck because of the assumptions people hold about the nature of reality. They often go along the lines of, I have my own experiences, therefore everything I experience is right for me, and what you experience is right for you. This means that God both exists for me and doesn't exist for you, and somehow that is okay. Or another encounter might be religious people are bad people, therefore God must be evil. I can't believe in a God that is evil and mean-minded and stupid, as Stephen Fry put it. Another very common problem for Christians and those who struggle with faith of any description is the theodicy problem, the problem of evil. Horrible things happen, especially to good people, so God must be inflicting this evil on them. These are all real theological and ethical problems, and YouTube is filled to the brink with debunkers proving the non-existence of God with these thought experiments, which rely on conflating ontology with epistemology. In other words, by inhabiting a one-dimensional universe that confuses reality with what we know about it. A well-known YouTube atheist, genetically modified skeptic, who seems to be genuine in his wide-eyed discovery of the scientific method, makes it his God with little understanding of the wider philosophies or sciences of knowledge that exist. Another Oxford undergraduate, cosmic skeptic, dives into clever mind games and thought experiments that primarily rely on one naive realist assumption about the nature of reality, and therefore God and theology. So often even the simple question, does God exist, falls over at the very response, no, but yet I still believe in him, because neither the naive realist nor the relativist has the philosophical tools to grasp a deity that exists beyond existence, cannot exist within the realm of the empirical, yet is still real in the realm of the real. In this YouTube essay and in subsequent films, I'm going to begin to explore what critical realism is and how it contributes to a better conversation about faith and religious experience. I start with the founder of critical realism, Roy Bhaskar's question, what should the world be like for science to be possible and intelligible? Or what should our understanding of theology be like for an understanding of God to be possible and intelligible? This means that much of what purports to be theology, well, internet and popular theology at least, contains certain assumptions about what knowledge is that renders God, and therefore religion and God, seemingly irrational and unintelligible. Posing the question of theology in this way turns upside down the theological project, asking the question what reality is like if God exists, rather than taking for granted our assumptions about reality and then trying to shoehorn God and our spiritual experiences into that. What are the conditions for the possibility of doing theology scientifically without making theology reductionist? The triumvirate of original critical realism provides three key propositions regarding knowledge, and therefore our possibility of knowing about God and things related to God that are very different to our commonplace approaches, and therefore need to be unpacked carefully first. The three propositions are ontological realism, epistemic relativism, and judgmental rationality. In short, and I will unpack these later, there is a reality beyond our immediate experience. Our experiences of that reality varies from person to person, but we are still able to make rational but contingent judgments about that reality, such that knowledge is not limited to our individualized and relativist experiences. The three are all important and all related. They are critical realist beliefs about the nature of knowledge and knowing. They are assumptions that directly affect our understanding of religious experience, religion, and ultimately God. Ontological realism assumes that reality is intransitive. This means that it is independent of our perception of the world. there is a world beyond our sense perceptions. However, according to epistemic relativism, our human knowledge is transitive. So, our knowledge about that world is finite, contextual, and fallible. Nevertheless, judgmental rationality requires that the diverse and competing claims about the world ought to be undertaken, and arrival at agreed knowledge about that reality is possible. After all, we are all human, and our sense perceptions are not so different that we can't come to some agreement. When this relates to religious experiences, it's tempting to think that everyone's spiritual experiences are all unique and different, and all the world religions are different and disagree, therefore they must be incorrect. This is not a correct conclusion to draw. It isn't true that individual spiritual experiences are fundamentally different from each other. There is a great deal of commonality, which is why they come together in groups around ritualized experiences, and ultimately religions. They share common religious experiences. As an aside, some people claim not to have religious experiences. This doesn't mean that they don't. It's just as likely that the experiences they have are attributed to different mechanisms, most often coincidence. That world religions disagree does not mean that they are wrong, but it does mean that there is still work to be done to arrive at a better understanding of the God that they are seeking to describe. Their knowledge of God is finite rather than infinite, contextual, written and spoken about within their own cultural and linguistic contexts and categories, and is fallible. This does not mean that we should abandon the work of theology and claim that all spiritual experience is wholly relativist and impossible to communicate to each other. It just means we have to work harder than we have done so far. This triumvirate of critical realism are fundamentally related to one another. It is ontological realism that provides for the possibility of judgmental rationality. If there is no objective reality, we would have no purpose for making rational judgments on theological propositions. Everyone's personal theology or spiritual experience would be equally valid or truthful to themselves, no matter how dangerous or problematic we might consider it to be. All religions would be equal, and all spiritual experiences, including the heretical and satanic, would be equally valid. But if there is a real God with real characteristics of love rather than hatred, for example, then judgmental rationality is committed to establishing that truth. On the other hand, epistemic relativism offers the rationale and necessity for judgmental rationality. Our transitive, limited and culturally bounded knowing results in a plurality of assertions about the same God, mandating the exercise of judgmental rationality. What critical realism means by rationality is not the same as accepting revealed dogmatic truths without question, but treating revelation itself as part of the transitive world. Our knowledge of it and the ability to communicate it is finite, contextual, and fallible. So knowledge is dependent on the knower, is created by the knower, and thus changes from knower to knower and reflects the different perspectives of them. But the reality that they are striving to describe is ontological and autonomous from the knower. So, even if human knowledge changes, critical realism allows a relativism but restricts it to human knowing and prohibits it from characterizing reality, keeping us from falling into what is called the slippery slope of relativism. If we look closely at how critical realism fits with other approaches to knowledge, we can see epistemic relativism become confused with judgmental relativism. Here, understanding that human knowledge is finite and fallible and differs according to one's perspective leads to the false judgmental conclusion that no human knowledge can be agreed upon, and even to the extreme ontological relativism in social constructivist thought that there is no objective reality at all. Naive realists, on the other hand, believe that there is an ultimate reality, a God, but reject epistemic relativism, therefore having limited need for judgmental rationality. Here, a naive realist would take for granted that God exists, but, for example, assume that their experience of that God is the only correct spiritual experience, and that all differing accounts of that God and associated spiritual experiences are simply incorrect or to be discounted. For a relativist, knowledge is mere opinion or experience, where for a naive realist, knowledge is mere facts with no real sense of how those facts have come to be, how they might have been contested or experienced in different times or cultures. For a critical realist, knowledge is not an opinion or a fact, but judgment, evaluated and made taking into account the varying facts and experiences over time and space. This resolves the relativism problem in theology and religion and opens up what Father John Goh of the Critical Realism Asia-Pacific Network identifies as pluralism, allowing for respect for and openness to other views. Relativism accepts all views are equally correct, where pluralism commits to what Roy Bhaskar calls underlabouring, the clearing away of the rubbish that clouds our judgment and understanding. Let's pause here for a moment, as we're just still clearing the weeds, and other films will have to get closer to the problem of evil or the existence of God. Now is a good time to put your questions in the comments below so that I can begin to explore the contribution of critical realism to your questions. Click like and subscribe to our channel so that you'll be notified when we upload the next film. Critical realism is a way of looking at the world, a way of approaching the questions we have about the world that resolves the problems raised by the one-dimensional worldviews created by naive realism and relativism. Critical realism makes a clear distinction between reality and our ability to know and describe that reality. This has implications for freedom of will and society, as well as for our problem of evil and our understanding of God and religions. I've only just begun to introduce this fundamental idea of clearly separating reality from our knowledge of reality, something that is so often confused. In the next film, I'll look at the problem of free will and Bhaskar's transformational model of social activity.